Hello, very beautiful community. I want to say a word almost like we're just having a 7-minute cup of coffee together quickly about Zelensky evisceratingly attacking Europe at Davos, about Trump's preposterous Board of Peace, and about Trump slandering NATO, and not for the first time saying that NATO's never come to the rescue of the United States, to the aid of the United States, and that in military engagements, the non-US members of NATO always stayed back and were not properly committed. So let's start with the NATO slander. Quite a few commentators have said that there is a strategy to it, and they're half right. They're right that there is a strategy to it, but they're wrong about what the strategy is. They said that the strategy, I don't want to hit particular names here, but the strategy is to devalue NATO in the eyes of the US electorate and normalize the United States de facto acting as though NATO doesn't exist. That is too strategic for Trump. But the commentators are right, clearly, insofar as I don't think this was a sort of a fairly spontaneously arising dispositional state that arises for Trump every 6 months. And he says this point. It's not even a point he quite believes, but it's a point that's part of his repertoire of remarks to make under particular conditions. You might say, well, surely he has to have a stable view as to whether it's true or false. And I think often that's not the case with Trump. He just has fleeting dispositional states. And only on a few issues, tariffs are one, does Trump actually possess steady beliefs that hold the test of time. So strategically, why did he say it then? He said it because he needed to change the subject, which became, for all of Trump's effort to ensure the opposite, that Trump had retreated on Greenland. Now, what we have to understand, just as an aside, is that Trump's retreated on Greenland for now. We don't know what's going to happen in a year or two, A. And B, Trump's not retreated from making the kind of move he made on Greenland on other issues and in other parts of the world. So, allowing for that, nevertheless, the story was too negative and too anticlimactic, and he needed to change it. And that's one of the things he said to put out into the informational environment to help himself. It's a well-practiced remark, and it's generated a lot of noise. And don't forget, Trump, when he says things, is regularly thinking not about whether it's true or false, not about whether it sort of articulates his position or what he wants to happen. What he's thinking about is how big is the commotion going to be after I say this? Who's going to be part of the commotion? And will the commotion advantage me relative to it not happening at all? So that's what I'd say about that remark. It's very profoundly damaging because it contributes to a kind of dissolution of the West. Because even people who are agnostic about Trump in Europe are going to be disgusted by this. You even see post-truth authoritarian European politicians who typically would say something favorable to Trump about virtually anything that comes up, are keenly aware that their own voters are not going to be happy for them to just comply with Trump's slander of, the European contribution, European lives lost. So that's, I think, what was happening. It wasn't just a sort of a blurting out, but the intent was to just briefly reshape what was dominant in the informational environment. Board of Peace. The best reaction is to laugh, of course. If you don't laugh, then you have to understand that it's a kind of formalization of Trump's narcissistic pathology. One of the things that it gives Trump is a sort of fulfillment of an omnipotent fantasy, because Trump's a member for life, and he can decide, he is the chair for life. He can decide who the next chair is going to be. He can overrule members. So it's a sort of a reservation onto which, at least at the level of appearances, he can play king of the world. And the particular way in which it sort of formalizes a narcissistic fantasy is that it defines roles around this psychologically natural distinction for Trump, which is between people who exist and people who don't exist. People who exist are people who fulfill his narcissistic supply, and people who don't. That doesn't quite map onto the world as well as Trump would like, because lots of people he'd like to join haven't joined. But nevertheless, it's a kind of, at least, 5 steps forward, 3 steps back attempt at a sort of practical and formal enactment of this division of the world that is anyway psychologically natural for Trump. So I'm going to have my own peace board, and that's going to be real, and everything else, the United Nations and other mechanisms on the international stage, are not real. Secondarily, watch for grift on it. It's always important to ask, right, what are going to be the benefits and the anticipated benefits of Trump's team as they engage in any kind of enterprise on the international stage? What are Trump's people going to gain out of the negotiations they're having with the Russians and so on? Ask the same about the board, right? Who's going to pay the money? Are they really going to pay the money? Where's the money going to go? Ask all of that, but understand that, in my view, this is a grift in the perhaps second order, but it's not primarily transactional financial grift. It's mostly about omnipotent fantasies about power. Now, Zelensky, and I lied about the 7 minutes, by the way, it's going to be 10. Zelensky had a very strong go at Europe, and the vast majority, it's not true of the sort of activist pro-Ukrainian space, but the vast majority of pro-Ukrainian responsible journalists said, whoa, this is going too far. I mean, we've just got the 90 billion, settled. We've increased defense spending. We've done this and that. And anyway, how's it going to benefit Zelensky? And so Zelensky said Europe is lost, and that it's a sort of collection of a geographical kind that doesn't constitute a major power, and that it's not able to stand for freedom effectively, and not able to deal with the United States that's going in a different direction and compensate for that. 2 quick remarks. Is this going to help, or is this going to hinder Zelensky getting support from the Europeans? It's not going to hinder it much, but on balance, it's a net negative for Ukraine that Zelensky has said that at the level of at least the spirit of European commitment to Ukraine. It's not terribly consequential negative, but it is a net negative. In other words, it's going to get people in corridors of power shrugging their shoulders and sort of grimacing. It's not going to get them to spend more on their military. Not that anything Zelensky could say would make that big a difference anyway, but if you wanted to make a small difference in the net positive direction, you say praise on the insufficient amount you've done without calling it insufficient, and saying how important it is for Ukraine and for Europe to do more, and why the fates of Europe and Ukraine are conjoined, with that being explained in a sort of robust and realistic way, not in a sort of magical and fantastic way. But you have to understand that Zelensky is, at least to a degree of 50% and more, when he says this, is addressing his domestic audience. Zelensky is in a very difficult position whereby, well, first of all, he is wobbled by the recent corruption sagas in Ukrainian politics, by the very slow but palpable degree of politicization in Ukraine. It's possible to ask questions about Zelensky in a way it wasn't 2 years ago. And it's very important that the current trajectory, unfortunately, is that we're heading for no deal, or a deal that is largely shaped by America, not Europe. That is not commensurate with where on balance, the Ukrainian public is at. And one of the places they're at is the expectation that more European support would have come than has come, or Western support would have come than has come. And so there is this dissonance that Zelensky is either on track for no deal or on track for a deal that is going to be very poorly congruent with the expectations of his citizenry. How does he deal with this? How does he balance that? So this is what he's in good part speaking to. Of course, the question arises, what would be the constructive way for Zelensky to work with public sentiment in Ukraine? And he's even powerful enough to do that. What does it even mean to talk about a certain public mood under an extreme situation? How malleable is it? How much does it represent what these same citizens would retrospectively think of things after the war and so on? So these are very, very difficult questions. Zelensky is dealing with them under enormous pressure. He is in a more defensive posture in domestic politics than he has been in the past. And these remarks, at least to a degree of 50%, are directed to home. Enough. Thank you so much for sharing the brief coffee with me, beautiful community. Catch you in the next day or two.